listening to the Astral Hour. I'm your host, Astral Meadow. Join me as we take a glimpse into the mysterious. Welcome, everyone. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming back Vaishnavi, which is her spiritual name. With over 50 years of dedicated study, teaching, and practice in the Vedic sciences, Vaishnavi brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to our discussion. She holds advanced certifications in Vedic Astrology and Ayurveda, along with deep expertise in the yoga tradition. Vaishnavi's journey has been one of profound self-discovery and spiritual growth. As a retired integrative clinical psychologist under the name Vaishnavi Roberson, she now uses both her Vedic counseling skills and her divinely inspired intuition and truth to provide transformative guidance, helping individuals align with their true selves and to navigate life's transitions. Today, Vaishnavi will share her insights on Vedic astrology and explore how understanding our cosmic blueprint can lead to greater clarity and purpose in life. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you back. I loved the last episode that we made together, and it was actually a really big hit on YouTube. It's one of my higher listened to ones on that platform. So our audience, definitely loves your wisdom and the beautiful work that you do. So thank you for being here. So we gave a little bit of an intro into you and your background. Could you start by just sharing a little bit about the unique differences between Vedic astrology in comparison to Western astrology?
Well, I think there's a few, but as I see it, the main difference has to do with the zodiac that we use. And in Vedic, which was the original system, it uses a sidereal zodiac, which is pinned to the sky, meaning it describes exactly where those constellations are, where those stars are. And they were the same, by the way, until about 900 AD. And then Europe, kind of in the Mediterranean area, kind of went off on its own. And they began to pin their tropical zodiac or Western zodiac to the solstices, which has to do with the sun's position vis-a-vis the earth. And it really isn't pinned to the sky anymore. So what has happened is that because of this difference, the Western zodiac is kind of pushed forward about 24 degrees. And so that's one difference. So there's almost a whole sign difference between the sidereal and the tropical zodiacs. And so also the kind of most interesting thing in certain ways in Western, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the sun. And, that makes sense. It's kind of based on the sun's relationship to the earth. And in Vedic, it wants to locate, what sign exactly your ascendant or your rising sign is, what was on the eastern horizon at the moment of your birth. And then the snapshot proceeds from there, and they take great account into where your moon is, because the moon is the repository of your life karma. It's kind of gets downloaded. The moon represents the mind, the emotions, the intuition, and ultimately your spiritual development. And so there's this download into the mind, the moon, of your main motivation, what makes you kind of have a higher probability of making choices in a certain direction, for example. And it also, the original system was based on a system of nakshatras. There are 27 nakshatras. It would predated the actual zodiac. The zodiac was laid on top of this nakshatras, and there are about 2.25 nakshatras per zodiac sign, by the way. So it's some of the nakshatras span and actually help to transition the two zodiac signs. So these nakshatras are really kind of giving us a lot of deeper information about the psychology of the person, what motivates them, what is going to, kind of set up impressions in the mind that, again, make them pay attention to certain things or seek out certain people in order to kind of play out their karmic blueprint in life, which was set at the moment of their birth. And last, therefore, because of its accuracy and its emphasis on karma, it can really focus and give you a spiritual blueprint for kind of your own spiritual evolution, but also it can help you understand, what is my life purpose? In this system, it's house 1, 5, and 9, for example. So those are some of the unique differences, I think, between Vedic and Western. And of course, I always say this is not to disparage Western, even though there may be a little bit of distortion in the system somewhere. It actually has evolved itself over time to accommodate some of those distortions, and both systems really have a gift to give.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And it's so interesting to think, well, how can both of these be valid? But, there's a lot of us that are putting our energies into it, studying, observing, and there are patterns to both systems that I feel like I see people make predictions in both that,
Yes.
are very relevant. So I think it's kind of just following the one that you really feel called to, that when you study it, you're like, this makes so much sense for me. And just letting the soul kind of guide you and steer you to which path might be the most relevant for you. And it might shift. I know a lot of people that started with Western that have moved into the Vedic perspective. So yeah, I think they both, like you said,
Yeah.
have a lot to offer.
I think that that's true. And I think, it's much more of an investment, I think, because of the complexity of learning Vedic astrology, that people don't seem to go the other direction,
Right,
in other
right.
words.
Once they start there, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of the people I follow and listen to their YouTubes and that sort of thing did start out as Western astrologers, and, later kind of came on board with the Vedic system.
Hmm. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about the moon and karma, but could you discuss the significance of the natal chart and how it's guiding individuals into their life's journey? And you did talk a little bit about the dharmic houses, but could you just explore that a little bit more for us?
Your natal chart, I would say one of the most first things we look at is your ruling planet. So this is going to be the planet that rules the sign that your ascendant is in. And so, for example, my ruling planet is Venus. I am a Libra ascendant, and that's how we identify ourselves in Vedic astrology. Our ascendant represents our identity in this lifetime, and this whole system posits that your soul will birth out a number of identities. It's kind of a reincarnation type of perspective, that you're birthing out from kind of some unmanifest place, right? So timelines are kind of irrelevant in certain ways, but so you're birthed out with this blueprint. And so your ruling planet is going to be your ruling planet your entire life. It represents a significant aspect of your identity. So for me, I am a Libra, which is all about relationships and being in right relationships. And at its highest, what we're shooting for also is to have an impact on uh, social justice and having right relationships among groups of people and on the planet and that sort of thing. So, it's from kind of learning to negotiate what are my needs, what are the other person's needs, how can we make a decision that's helpful to both or at least harmful to both, that sort of thing. That's what Libra is always going over in their mind, and they're very aware of the impact that their decision might have had on the outcome in everyone's life. So Venus is always my ruling planet, but Venus also rules my eighth house, for example. And that is a house of transformation. So I know that, for instance, in my life, I can look forward to continual transformation.
Right, no stress.
And the eighth house sometimes is also representative of kind of researching deeply into the things. And so, it can include the occult and, these esoteric sciences. So that fits as well. And usually some of the transformations are, every time we kind of gain something, we're also saying goodbye to something else. So I am really good at kind of learning to let go of and work through the vulnerabilities of the change and turn it into a strength and bring that to my work.
Right. Yeah. And for me, I feel like the reason I can kind of see the connection of both is that in both forms, because you've done my chart for me, which was
Yes.
an incredible analysis. Saturn's ruling them in both, because in Western I'm Aquarius rising, and then in Vedic I am Capricorn rising. So I have this Saturnian influence from both perspectives, and I think that's why I'm like, yeah, this makes sense. But I mean, it does change the dynamics up a little bit, and
Yes.
I actually feel a little bit freer with my Vedic chart. Like I don't know. It just seems a little bit more open. I like the idea of my moon being in Sagittarius and not Capricorn. And so sometimes I like to shift it over a little bit and just give myself a little break and
Yeah.
just see what I'm working with from that perspective. But
Yeah.
yeah. Let's see. Could you share an example of how Vedic astrology has provided clarity and guidance to someone that you've worked with in their life in a direct way?
Uh, yes. I think I might use as an example I've done a chart for a person over the years, so we can get more and more deeply into the meaning of her planets, but also looking at what's coming across the sky right now, right? And so we have an eclipse coming up, which we can discuss a little bit maybe further later in the podcast. But this eclipse is happening in her first house, her house of identity. And very often eclipses, because it is about where the north and the south nodes of the moon are, or Rahu and Ketu, respectively. It reveals karmic changes that are slated to be happening. The moon actually obscures the rays of the sun. So for a while, it's confusing. Who are we? What is our soul's journey? And that sort of thing. And the moon is dark. It's new moon. So, the mind isn't as resilient as it normally is in a full moon situation. And so eclipses create a certain vulnerability within us. And when it's in the house of your identity, it can be very confusing. And it's right across from the other node of the moon, the seventh house, relationship. So that dynamic of what are my needs? What are the needs of relationship? Who am I? who am I in relationship to other people has been really activated for her. And I think helping her understand this activation has enabled her to make space in her life to allow those transformations of identity to occur and to allow the karmic issues associated with her own identity and her identity in relationships to emerge and be processed. She does a certain form of therapy that you can do on yourself that she's really, and she engaged someone to help her also through this time. And she talks to me so that she can just kind of in journal, artwork, all of that expressive can get it out before you and begin to sort it out. And so knowing this was coming, she's made space for it to happen. And so, when you know a challenge is coming, you can help somebody kind of with remedies to mitigate the challenges, but also if you know something good. I mean, it's her identity changing is a good thing. I mean, she's expanding who she is. It's kind of a new aspect of herself that has awakened. And so she can take advantage of that kind of gliding through or avoiding the obstacles and taking advantage of the positive influences that are affecting. Yeah. So you can help to identify those things. And also, what I would recommend to her, and she's doing it, is just that. Do those practices that take you inward instead of all the time outward in your busy life. Make that space to go inward and meditate, breathe, do your spiritual practice. And she's done that.
I really love that when we kind of know that it is in alignment with where we're supposed to be, we tend to not resist it so much. And
Yes.
it gives us this permission to just, like you said, like she can just allow herself to go through that transformation instead of being like, oh my God, what is wrong with me? Like, this is, instead of being like upset about that, to be like, oh, well, I'm in alignment because like this is supposed to be happening, and just embrace the challenges and obstacles and almost be like grateful for them, right? Like practice this
Yes.
gratitude of like, thank you, because, I don't want to be stagnant and not evolve in this lifetime. And so I do think knowing the challenges and then knowing there's a light at the end of the tunnel is also nice. So you can be like, okay,
Absolutely.
this is hard, but there will be a time to integrate and reflect and be at peace soon as well. So that's been like such a huge thing for me with some of my challenges because I'm like, this is too much. It's so heavy. I can't do this. But
Well,
then,
go ahead.
it ebbs and flows, we have those intense moments and then we have those integration periods. So,
Yeah, and I would just add it can help you make important decisions.
mhm.
And if the reading resonates with you about your life path, for instance, you may be more willing to kind of move on from a situation that is got you stuck, for
Right,
instance. Yeah.
right.
So that's another thing that can happen.
Yeah. And I love all the synchronicities with readings and they like continue to kind of um, come to you afterwards like, oh, well, this makes, like she did say this. And it's like it helps you be more aware of those connections
Yes.
because you have spent time kind of thinking about it or analyzing it. So with our reading, Rahu was one of my guides in my records. And then when we had our reading, you were like, oh, well, you're coming out of this Rahu Ketu and then going into Rahu Venus. So it would make sense that like Rahu was like this guide for me.
Yes.
And it made me want to research the myth from that Vedic perspective a little bit more because I'm like, well, this is so relevant. Like you didn't know, before that reading that he had been my guide.
Yes.
Um, and so I was like, okay, well, it's like I think that's what makes it kind of this living wisdom. It's not just these myths that are just, tales that we're telling over time. Like there is this essence of aliveness to them and they come alive in our lives in a very realistic way. And I love how astrology helps us kind of see the myths playing out and the characters that are coming forward. And it's probably one of my favorite parts about astrology. So
And, I mean, this is just on a more personal level, and a lot of people don't necessarily experience astrology this way. But to me, it's actually a spiritual practice.
Mhm.
And so, if, for example, Saturn is your ruling planet and therefore very important to you. But also, Saturn is my Yoga Karaka planet, which means that it is the planet through which I achieve success. And so it's a challenging planet. It's never satisfied. It always wants you to do something better, improve something, all of that. There's pressure, there's time pressure, but it also, its gifts are, a certain sense of discipline and persistence and ability to work hard and stick to it and commit and all of those things. So Saturn really can make you great. So embracing Saturn's gifts is just as important as kind of navigating the challenges. I have a deep relationship with Saturn because of that. And also the other planets, because when I started studying astrology, I would like go to bed and, in that reverie before sleep, I just would, almost like journey out. My mind would journey out and have this like connection with the intelligence of that planet, with the soul of that planet. And so you deepen that relationship and your understanding of what that planet is about over time, as well as some of the other concepts, of course. But those things then awaken within you that intelligence. And so it's not just about what's happening in the sky and what's happening on this earth and there being some kind of parallel, but it's like that stream of creative, intelligent energy that's coming from the planet and awakening something within you. And what can I do to further that awakening?
Yeah. Yeah, I really have loved having this deeper relationship to the planets, like, and seeing them as kind of this living stream of wisdom that's affecting us. But
Yes,
it's really you that helped me with Saturn, and the malefic planets were the harder ones for me to see the beauty of, because especially in Western and like medieval astrology, I mean, it's so Saturn and Mars are looked at really, really poorly, and they're kind of big planets for me. So I'm like, am I just like doomed? I was just getting too caught up in this story that had been told. And it was actually you that really helped me reevaluate my relationship with Saturn. And I've also been
yay.
working with Mars, because I'm like, we don't want to just tame Mars and just like chuck him out, like he has such an important placement, it's like, it's so like, that's our drive. Like that's how we, accomplish our soul's desires. But it's like I really loved the Vedic perspective, and trying to blend it in with my practice, because it helped me shine a light on some of the malefic planets and be like, okay, this is good. Like this is all for us in the end. And
That's right.
you really
That's
helped
right.
me with that along the way. So I have gratitude for you.
And it's not just Western that gets all negative. I mean, a lot of Vedic astrologers too. There's something called Saturn Sadasati, which is when the Saturn in the sky is going over your natal moon.
Hmm.
And so it creates this 7.5 year period where it's in the sign before your natal moon, the sign of, and the sign after your natal moon. And so the moon is your psychology, and Saturn's a little bit, kind of demanding and pressuring and demanding change, and it doesn't feel as good, right? And so it's a challenge for 7.5 years when that happens, because it takes Saturn, I think, about 29.4 years to go around. So you might have uh, at least two of these periods, and sometimes three, in your lifetime. And so there's a lot of kind of negativity, like doom gloom stuff that happens in the Vedic astrology world about Saturn Sadasati. But it can be a good thing, and here's why. So I want to give you an example. According to my teacher's rectification of the United States chart, Saturn, the United States is going through Saturn Sadasati right now.
Mm.
And so you can feel what's happening in the collective consciousness right now in terms of the negativity that is there. But also, there's this whole other aspect of, watching the destruction of something that is definitely no longer needed as a structure around the way we run our society and our economic systems and our climate systems, all kinds of things. And the need to develop something new that is more enlightened. Yes? And so, having that emphasis on, the fact that some people kind of talk about the 3D world and the 5D world, right? Mm-hmm. So, we're in that chaotic, that's actually a word, chaotic period, which has to do in systems theory with the dissolution of a old system and the creation of the new. There's this period of chaos in the center of it. And so I think that's what we're into right now.
Yeah. And I think when you're aware of that, you can be like, oh, well, it's challenging because it's supposed to. Like these structures are supposed to fall or be reevaluated or evolve as we're evolving, So yes. It's like you could kind of just like rest and be like, okay, this is good. This is supposed to happen. So yeah, discovering the Sati transit was huge for me because, I was reading The Greatness of Saturn that you recommended, and I'm like, oh, this is why she recommended it, because I was born with Saturn conjunct my moon. And so I was actually born in that transit. And when it happened for me, which I just kind of got out of it, I'm like processing what happened. It happened during my Saturn return. And so it was really hard for me, but I'm like, okay, well, maybe it's not going to be that bad for everyone if they're not going through their Saturn return at the exact same time. But then I'm also like, I was born into this. And then I looked at that process of like, this is a big moment for me. Like it's like the integration of this whole, past like 29 years. And I don't know, it helped me move through it, I think, a little bit more gracefully, and then be like, oh, well, it's been hard because it's just hard. It's just like, it's not that I'm being dramatic or anything. It was challenging for me. But, my husband is kind of coming to the end of his, and it's been a lot different than mine. And so I'm glad I didn't project that doom and gloom onto him. Like now there's been a lot of change. He's had to reevaluate a lot of things. Not been the easiest time, but I think for both of us going through it so close together, I mean, we've really leveled up. And I had so much like beauty in my Sadasati too, because my children were born, I did lose my parents, but then there was also this ushering in new life. And so I'm like, I can see the beauty that comes from the challenges. And I think if we are so scared because people have planted these seeds of like, it's going to be the worst thing ever, and they forget to also talk about the beauty that grows.
Blessings.
Right, right. So I love that you focus on both aspects and like, okay, this is hard. Here's what we can do, and I just feel like that's such a beautiful, practical way of working with it instead of just scaring people. Because like when you think about like planting these seeds of doubt, I mean, we can water those and like really manifest, a lot of rough things because of the fear that comes from that.
That's
so
right.
I don't want anyone leaving a reading with me terrified, so
Yes.
I loved your reading too, because I felt so empowered afterwards. Like I'm doing a good job. Like I'm in alignment with my soul's growth. And
well, and I think that is because in some ways, when you think about it, we don't have there's only like a range of possible like decisions or actions that we can take. And our karma, our mindset will kind of shrink those into a higher probability that you will go in a certain direction. It's not slated, and we have free will to make choices. But the idea is that you can use Vedic astrology to inform your choices.
Right.
And and so that it supports the karmic unfolding of your life. If you're in a karmic period that, let's say, is associated with a planet that is ruling your career house, then you know that you're going to focus on your career for a while. Yeah.
Right.
So it can be very helpful. So you're going to make decisions that maybe prioritize that over some other things.
Right. Yes. Yes. So with Vedic, we talked about some of the differences, but as far as like the houses and the zodiac signs, do they tend to keep their meaning, or is there a little bit of variation there?
I haven't studied Western, so I don't know the depth of it, but my feeling and what I always say to this question is that the meaning of the houses and the signs is predominantly the same, and the planets too,
Right.
all three. It's just the whole map, the blueprint
Right.
is going to be different.
Right. And, looking at the chart that you pulled for me, it's set up in more of a square instead of a circle. And I think it was really helpful to have you because, I'd wrap my mind around looking at it in this circle. So I'm like, when I looked at this chart before talking to you, I'm like, I don't know how to read this, but you really helped provide some clarity around it. And I was able to see how they correspond, even though they look different when you see this square blueprint instead of a circular one. So,
Well, I think, what I'd like to say is that, I'm predominantly retired. I'm 75 years old, but there's been a lot of people trying to drag me back out into the world. I've had a lot of feedback from people doing readings for me, that I should be working with young people. And so I've done a lot of research into Gen Z and the millennials. I've led a life really, well, it's not, kind of rich or anything. I've got a sense of abundance in my life, and I've really been afforded educational privilege, and I continue to study. I'm a lifelong learner.
mhm.
And so I have a lot of wisdom to give, and everybody's right. I should come out and start sharing it with people. So I've decided to kind of target the younger people who are our future.
Mhm.
Gen Z, millennials, even Gen X, that these people are, taking over as the boomer generation kind of dies off and moves out and retires. And so, supporting. And those people happen to be a more spiritual set than
Mhm.
my own demographic of boomers. And they're more open to astrology and interested in astrology. And so, what I decided to do is to create a kind of, I'm calling it a challenge. It's kind of like a 5 session class that will help people just know these basics, some of which I'm talking about today, which give them an understanding so that they can kind of follow along, at least to know what's coming up for them in terms of this next eclipse, for example, or what house is that going to happen for them, and what does that mean, that it's in Virgo and that sort of thing. So I'm hoping in this sessions that to give people the key tools to
Mhm.
be able to kind of use astrology in their lives without having to dive in and take a, $1,400 course or a $600 course, which are out there on the internet, but it's also quite an investment financially. This would be much less, but I hope does the trick. And from there, actually, I hope to even get a community of people going that are just kind of supporting each other and kind of discussing various topics and that sort of thing, an online community that will help people, support people in their process of learning, but also just of growing, do
Yeah.
classes, that sort of thing. Yeah.
I love that so much. I love that you're taking the time to pass the wisdom down because I think it's hard to find a grounded teacher sometimes that can guide you and, that's already lived a lot of these experiences. So instead of just having the mental component, they also have had the life experience that goes with the mental aspects. And we don't really have a lot of, like the grounded kind of teachers, the guru in our culture. And I just really have a lot of respect for the people, that could go into retirement and they're like, well, actually, I would like to help assist this next generation. So I love that. And then just giving them some basic information because, not everyone wants to grow up to become an astrologer. So,
That's
but
right.
that doesn't mean that they can't benefit by
That's right.
understanding their chart. So I really love that you're helping them because I have so many people that are like, I just can't, I can't figure it out. And, I'm like, they have all these books that they can't read because they don't have time. And I'm like, well, you're not wanting to become an astrologer. So, you just
Yeah.
need a little guidance on some of what's going on right now, some of the, just self-analysis and things like that. And that really gets people far.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I love that you're providing this community for
I
people to.
tried to learn through books initially, and
Mhm.
I think you have to have a teacher.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and depending on your Jupiter, where it is and how intelligent it is how kind of you might choose well or maybe not choose the best and have to find another one or something like that. And so Jupiter is the teacher, and in one of its manifestations. And so, I think that we've been taught to kind of look for something outside of ourselves,
Hmm.
and some guru type. And that's a very hierarchical, model, and we're flattening things out. And so, if you go take a class with a person who's written many books, you're not going to get individualized attention
Right.
from them, and you're not going to have that relationship with them because it's just kind of they're too a little too distant or something. So that's what one of the gaps I hope to close in what I'm doing is that, to have real human to human interaction that happens. Because in my mind and in my experience, I've been so blessed to study with people who are authors and sit in their presence of these pretty darn evolved souls, and in some cases even do qualify as a guru.
Right.
And being in the presence and engaging in the study, like I said, it's just a spiritual practice in and of itself. The layers of ego start to peel away, and you have a deeper understanding just being in the presence sometimes of this process of teaching that goes on.
Yeah. I love that. So is this the Star Wisdom Seekers community that we're talking about?
Yes, yes, the community I hope to form. And
Okay.
it's on an online platform that I'm still learning. I actually have, I was on the internet when it was still dial up. So I've followed
Right.
technology along, but this is very complex today, what we're trying to put together, but I'm doing it. So
Yeah. Yeah, you do great at it. Sometimes I feel like you're teaching me like how to use my computer when we're talking. So you're definitely evolving with the times and being able to work with the internet's really helpful because it's, even for me, like with my kids and everything, like there's so much I wouldn't be able to learn if I had to drive around and meet in person. So I love the opportunities to learn that I wouldn't have if we weren't using the internet to make the
I
connection.
know it's like the technology is fabulous. The software programs are great. I mean, I just sometimes think of these ancient rishis, these seers and the sages, that could see all of this in their mind. But in actuality, sometimes these things take enormous calculation powers
Mhm.
to, cast some of the divisional charts, for instance, and that sort of thing. And we have computers to do that, but also AI. I'm actually using a little bit of AI
Mhm.
in some of the consultations that I do. which is interesting because, we don't want it to be artificial,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, who wants it? So I'm actually working with someone as a coach who's into heart-centered business. And so, how do we use these 21st century tools without losing the heart-centered quality of our business? And so for me, using AI, and people could learn to do this. And in fact, that might be a part of my teaching. Is if you know your natal chart enough to know, and then you look at the transits, what's happening in the sky over you, and you can identify, for instance, that Saturn is going over your moon, or Mars is going over your ascendant, or whatever, or that you're having an eclipse in Virgo in your 12th house. Well, what does that mean? And what do you do about it? Because that's what we need to do as astrologers, is we need to make it practical for people.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just wanting this intellectual knowledge of what planets are active. They want to know, well, what do I do about it? Right? They want something practical that they can use in their lives. And so AI has been fabulous for that. I mean, we learn certain remedies, but I mean, it spits out some really creative and interesting remedies. And so sometimes what I do is I take a paragraph that has to do with the person's natal chart, their dasha period, which we haven't gotten into yet, kind of the cycle of kind of planetary rulerships that is dominating your karma at the time, which will be kind of highlighting certain houses, right? And you can kind of feed it that information. And here's this transit that's going over, their 12th house. And so I prompt it with a little, information in that way. And then I ask, what are the gifts, the challenges, and the remedies associated with this particular transit?
Mm-hmm.
And it'll spit it out. That including remedies. And one remedy, by the way, for most every situation, but especially for Saturn, is doing service,
Mm-hmm.
maybe to a nonprofit, or to Saturn is kind of governs in a certain way the elders. So it might be helping an elderly person in some way. And that kind of runs through them all, as does doing your spiritual practice, because why, it's integrating these changes that are happening. But then it will have some that are specific to the planets. So sometimes it talks about gemstones, which is a whole kind of area that, for instance, my teacher doesn't get into because he feels like people can't afford really to do it right. And it's about wearing, like I'm wearing the faceted quartz crystal, which is kind of a cheap version of diamonds, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is has to do with my ruling planet, Venus. So it just kind of enhances that Venus energy.
Right.
So that's another remedy. But then some, like I said, are going to be specific to the particular planet. It might be doing a mantra. So we have something called japa meditation, which is to have a mala, which is 108 beads. And we might have a certain mantra associated with a planet or a goddess that rules the planet or is associated with the planet. And so it might recommend a mantra that we can do this japa meditation in order to kind of honor that planet and build that connection and that flow of natural intelligence with that planet.
Yeah. I really love the remedies that were suggested in the reading that you did for me, and the chat thing was awesome. It's just like it puts all this information quickly together, grounds it, and like you were saying, if you could teach, people how to work with it, then they could be a little bit more independent with trying to figure it out on their own. And then, comparing what they intuitively maybe thought with what the results are saying. And I do think working with technology with that open heart is such a beautiful picture, because I think we can work with it in a positive way, because it's here. So so many people resist it. And I'm like, I do think it's a part of our future, and it's a matter of how we work with it.
Well, and of course, AI chat is improving all the time, and it's remembering more and more about who you are in the chats that you're running. And so, you can get it to be talking in a voice that's very similar to yours. I don't always take everything, one to one, whatever it spits out. I go
Right.
over it and make sure,
Right.
because chat does make mistakes.
Hmm.
And in fact, when it first came out, it was very confused about Western and Vedic astrology and the differences and that sort of thing. And so it's kind of updated itself a bit, I've noticed, in this recent kind of preparing for this podcast. It doesn't seem to be giving as many wrong answers.
Right.
But we can't, we still need that human touch, basically,
Right.
I think, to develop the prompts and kind of teach it the language that is our heart-centered way, and also help it give us answers that are practical and useful to people.
Yeah, I love that. So let's shift a little bit to talk about the eclipse that is about to happen. So this podcast will be coming out the day before.
Yay!
Yeah, so it's gonna be like peak eclipse energy. So could you just take a little bit of time to sort of explain the solar eclipse from that Vedic perspective and what people can kind of expect with this energy?
So in Vedic astrology, this eclipse is happening in Virgo, the sign of Virgo, which is ruled by Mercury. And Mercury, of course, is about communication and technology to a certain degree, and learning new skills and discernment of thoughts that are true with a capital T versus thoughts that are not. And so Mercury is a very important planet, and it is actually I believe it's a part of this eclipse. Let me just make sure that I'm speaking the truth here.
I think it
Yeah,
might be conjunct.
yeah, yeah. I mean, in this eclipse, there are K2, Moon, Sun. Of course, Moon and Sun will always be together in a solar eclipse,
Mhm.
and Mercury. So the node and the eclipses are typically going to be either with the Moon and Sun will either be with K2 or Rahu. So Rahu, that north node of the Moon, is about expanding ourselves outward into the world and seeking out experiences that essentially challenge us. They're karmic challenges, but as we work them through and burn those karmas, we are becoming greater. Well, K2 is the south node of the moon, the more spiritual end. It's more the mind and emotions and the intuition and that sort of thing. So it's about diving deeper. So K2 has this quality, number one, it doesn't really want to, it kind of likes to be alone and isolated a little bit because, it's easier to go within when there's not a lot of noise around you, right? And so, it kind of pulls back and disengages a little bit. And it is about the past lives that you've had of your samskaras, or your mental kind of karmic issues, and your emotional karmic issues, and your spiritual ones as well. And so this is a K2 eclipse, basically. It's emphasizing this more inward stroke. And K2 is never satisfied, right? It's always wanting to go deeper. So it's got a little self-criticism involved with it. a lot of times. It's kind of looking at your own mind and essentially, you know, saying how can things be better, or maybe even having some negative thinking patterns come up, or karmic patterns or emotional patterns come up. And the idea is to go inward and do spiritual practice on the eclipse day if you can. A lot of us have to work and that sort of thing, but to the extent that you kind of take it easy, don't make major decisions because it can be confusing to decide. And yet it all has this Virgo quality, and Virgo is an earth sign, and it is about being organized and planning and practical and grounded. And so it's actually kind of grounding this eclipse energy. So for me, this eclipse energy is happening in my 12th house, which is the house that I think it's biggest gift. This house is learning to surrender your ego to a new version of your identity, which is the first house, right? Mm-hmm. And so that is what's happening, and it shows up in your dreams. It's stuff that's coming up from your unconscious and, kind of going up into the surface and being released. And so that will be my plan, is to do spiritual practice. And for you, it's in your, ninth house, was it?
Yeah, I think so in Vedic, because it would be eighth in Western. What Virgo would be.
So for you, number one, that might be your purpose, being reflective and going within and kind of understanding more deeply your purpose and your dharma in this lifetime. What is the meaning of it all? And it's going to kind of have things surface up that clear out the pathways associated with really more deeply understanding your spiritual purpose in particular, since you're a spiritual person.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And yeah, so you look at what house it's in to see what area of life is being transformed. And I would say, my teacher has a nice metaphor where he talks about kind of a triangular, isosceles triangular, meaning it's got a big base and it's got two equal sides and coming into a peak. And October 2nd would be the peak, mm-hmm. basically, of the transmission of the energy of this transformative energy of this eclipse. And so, he suggests that it starts a few months before and that you integrate it a few months after. But that peak period is a couple weeks before and a couple weeks after, which of course we are in. So right. I'm expecting that there's a lot of confusion going on in people's minds about, some area of life according to what house that Virgo is for them. But maybe even in general, I know for me, this eclipse is happening right on top. Not only is it in my 12th house, which is about the unconscious surfacing, but it's also right on top of my moon, totally conjunct with my moon. And so, that's just a lot of energy on my mental field. And so that's kind of how I'm experiencing it. And I've really been very low key and kind of waiting until I'm through this period to really launch a lot of stuff associated with my teachings and that sort of thing. But of course, it has its gifts as well. And that's why I'm doing this podcast with you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I definitely feel like it just has put some changes, like where I'm just having to think a little bit differently. Like I had this plan and, I had this expectation, and then I'm like, well, actually, it seems like spirit is, just kind of some redirection, around this time. So I've just been practicing non-attachment and, like you say, kind of going within. And the last eclipse, I've really focused on meditation, and I do feel like I was more grounded. in that space. And like the challenges that did come up, I felt like I was just more like aware of why they were there instead of just being like, what the heck is this? But in the past, the eclipse seasons have been like a time for a lot of anxiety for me. But this last time I did the spiritual practices, I was doing the mantras, and I was really trying to not be as active
Yeah,
in my external world. And it was like night and day different. So I do think these remedies,
can
they
really
do
help.
help. They really do help. And to just know, that this is a collective energy and a lot of people aren't doing the spiritual practices. So they're just reacting and, it's just, I don't know, it keeps me um, grounded, I think, to have that spiritual practice to lean on during this time. So I love that you help guide people with that because it's such a good support that a lot of us just don't know about. So,
Yeah.
all right. So, we've talked a little bit about the star wisdom seekers. Are there any other resources or practices that you would recommend for someone just starting out into their journey with Vedic astrology?
Well, like I said, to find a teacher that you feel good about. And I think that it probably could be fairly easy. And I just want to go back maybe to tell the story of, like I said, I'd been having my own chart done for probably 10 years. And so you learn a little as your astrologer is telling you all these things, you kind of learn about this and that a little bit. But it's not systematic yet in your mind. And so, you get out the books and you're reading about, okay, what does it mean? Moon in this house and the sign, and that doesn't really work either. It's just too piecemeal that you need a system that helps you learn. And I was guided to study with my teacher, Sam Jeppy. And so through a number of synchronicities, and I took a workshop on relationships, and it was like he was speaking a foreign language
Mm-hmm.
to me in certain ways. I mean, he wasn't. I knew some of the concepts, but I was just unable to really get the system, clearly in my mind. And I did a couple of courses where that was the case. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to take his certification course. So that's what my process was. It was, I call it my pandemic project. So it was 2020 when I signed up. And it was a 6 months process. And I can tell you, I haven't taken the level 2. I hope to do that. But I'm still more deeply learning level 1 of all of what I've learned there. And so, I felt good about this particular teacher who is one, my Jupiter, whose Sanskrit name is Guru, is debilitated, meaning I am supposed to awaken this knowledge from within me. I'm not supposed to look to an outward person to have a guru that I surrender to. That's
Mm-hmm.
just not me. And so I'm very fortunate that he works hard to keep himself out of that guru concept.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a good match. And then I listened to YouTubes. Camilla
Mm-hmm.
Sutton, Joni Patry, and Sam Jeppy, David Frawley, and his wife sometimes do some YouTubes or podcasts or classes and so on. There's a lot for free that you
Mm-hmm.
can access. And in fact, I want my community there to be a free, the Wisdom Star Seekers to be a free component so that we're not kind of blocking access to people who are going through tough financial times, which a lot of young people are.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very difficult time economically for probably a good 80% of people with housing trouble and, the workplace is changing and so on. So, that kind of gaining access to free knowledge is helpful, but it can help you choose a good teacher. So that's just my perspective. You need a kind of systematic and interactive way of learning
Hmm. Yeah.
in order to kind of really dive deep.
Yeah. I do think there's a little bit of consistency with it that helps because people get a reading and then you see them 3 years later, they're like, I don't remember any of it. I'm like, well, you only spent an hour and a half, thinking about it. And so I think if you explore it more regularly, like you say, with this community and that people are talking about the transits and they're sharing their personal experiences with those transits. So it becomes like this
It,
beautiful way of like exploring it in the real world with other people that are also having, you know, different and because it's so personal, but maybe they experience the transit that we're going through, right? In their chart already, and like they can help share like what was the most beneficial thing for them. So I do love the community aspect, um, as far as being able to not only gain the wisdom, but have people to share with
yes.
and say, well, I really appreciated this perspective, and that I learned from this YouTube video.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah,
I just
with
think
all the
that's so beautiful.
resources, it can be a whole area of resources that people can access. But I mean, I keep having this thought, and then we move on to a different topic, and it doesn't seem related, but I just want to share this because like it keeps coming into my mind, and that is that sometimes we're going through a lot of transformation. And I think a lot of people are. And sometimes, I mean, how does the kind of, I don't know what you would call it, the higher self that really doesn't have a body, it's more of an energetic force. How does that interface with our mind, body, spirit kind of manifestation on the planet? And it interfaces a lot through the nervous system.
Hmm.
And so, in my, again, decades of experience of my own transformations and growth, there have been periods when the transformation was so intense, I would just break out crying. I
Hmm.
didn't even know what it was about. I mean, if you search, you can find something, but that's not the point because really what's happening is much deeper than some surface level conflict in a relationship or at a job or something. You're going through a transformation, and if the nervous system kind of gets behind in accommodating those changes, that it jangles it enough that we begin to have emotional release, right? That comes out in crying or just maybe even just sadness at a kind of lower level. Emotions coming. And I also view that to, it's the collective consciousness kind of moving through us in certain ways as well.
Hmm.
I often feel like I like to tap into what is going on in the collective consciousness right now so that I kind of can have a read on how I might be most helpful. And so to do that, you feel it. You feel it moving through you. And I think that process of feeling it and allowing it to be released emotionally without kind of judging it, just witnessing it, can be transformative, not only for you and help your nervous system just kind of balance it all out, but you're actually acting as a little bit of a vent, if you will, for the collective consciousness to release some of that uh, pent up emotional transformational energy.
Right. Right. I love that. I'm glad that you shared that perspective on it. So, yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to go into before we kind of wrap up how people can connect with you and find
Well,
this community?
I am going to do kind of a free introductory lecture, short thing that will happen probably at the end of October. And from there, I would encourage people to take this little 5 session class on how they can put Vedic astrology, make it practical and put it into their own lives. And as a part of that, you'll get, some membership to the free aspect of my community. So that's what I have coming up. So the class itself will be happening probably once a week during the month of November and maybe into early December. And you will get, actually, after the intro lecture, I'll send you a copy of your Vedic chart, so that you can, it can help you understand what I'm talking about and personalize it to your situation. So again, I'm just hoping to fill that gap of kind of more heady type of astrology, which I'm really into, frankly. I mean, I love that. But we also need to bring it down to the planet and into our bodies, embody it, and make it manifest in our lives. And so that's what I hope to do. So I think what we'll do is I'll send you a link to the landing page for the intro lecture. I think that would be a good start. And maybe my website that you can see more about me, and my social media too. I'd love to connect with people on social media because I hope probably, what can I say? I'm a boomer, we'll be posting on Facebook. Some things that might have to do with this eclipse and some other things that are happening in the sky as we work into having the intro lecture and so on. So follow me on my Facebook page. I think it'll be in the links below the podcast posting. Yeah.
Yeah.
How's that?
Sounds good. Yeah. I'll make sure I add all the links and how people can find and contact you into the description. So I'm really looking forward to this work that you're starting.
I do individual readings as well, that take some time and cost more money than this little course that I'm going to be having. So there's that as well.
Right, which might be nice to have the background on your chart before too, just so you kind of have an idea.
Exactly. It was actually my impulse. Why not have a little class? And it's not as though you won't still mention that, Mercury is the planet of communication or something like that in the talk that you're giving, just to remind people. But they will have already been exposed to that knowledge so that they can take in more of the reading. So, yeah.
Right. I love that. Well, thank you for coming on the show. I absolutely love anytime I get to connect with you and share your wisdom with our audience. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come on here and talk with us today. So
thank you.
Yeah. And thank you all for tuning in. Check us out next time on the Astral Hour.